start off with tonight, which is the tribulation is all about the nation of Israel and bringing them back to repentance. So I posited this question. I don't know if I pronounced that right or if you know what that means. I offered this question to you guys earlier, probably week one, which is, what is the purpose of the tribulation? Because it's certainly not to. So let me jump back here and we'll sort of make this the beginning of the. Oops, that's not where I want to go. So why is God sending this time of judgment to the world? Because certainly once he raptures the church, if he was just done, then certainly, and everybody's going to go to hell anyway who hadn't accepted him, then what's the purpose of making their life here on earth miserable, as well as, sending them to an eternity of misery? He could just cut out the middleman and just send them straight there. But there is a purpose for the tribulation.
I think it's a refining process.
For who?
For the Jews.
Okay.
Well,
in what way are they being refined?
I think God is going to cause anguish amongst the Jews to see who turns back to God and who doesn't. I think that might have something to do, I might be wrong here, with the 144,000.
We will talk about that tonight, definitely.
Yeah, and I think that's what the tribulation is for, is to weed out those 144,000.
To weed them out?
Or weed them in.
Weed them in? So the good news for us, and good news for the people we'll talk about, is that it's not just the 144,000 that will be saved in the tribulation. Revelations actually says a multitude as big as the sand on the sea will come to faith in Christ during that time. The 144. Well, let me put a pin in that for now, because we're definitely going to talk about that tonight. But let's take a jump back to the tribulation. So God's purpose all along was to fulfill his promises that he made to Abraham first, and then also, so a lot of people say, okay, well, the church is the children of Abraham because of faith, because Hebrews and another book talk about that. The church is children of Abraham, but because we were both saved the same way. The Bible says that Abraham was saved by faith, and we are also saved by faith. So we're children of Abraham. But God also made promises to the people of Israel through the giving of the law, and he also made a covenant to David. And those had nothing to do with us. We've never been called in the Bible children of David. That is strictly a Jewish thing. And God made promises to David that has yet to be fulfilled. And so I said all that to say this: it is God's intention to go back, turn his eyes back to his chosen nation and bring them to redemption. The book of Zechariah, I think I showed this verse probably week one, maybe week two, talks about how 1/3 of the Jewish people are going to come to faith in Christ. Is in unbelief, in the sense that they do not believe in the Messiah that God provided to them. They're still looking for a Messiah. Some of those people are going to be brought to repentance or to a saving faith of Jesus. And that's going to be done during the tribulation. Now, again, I'm not saying that Jewish people are not part of the church as well. There are many Jewish people that are part of the church, and they will be raptured before the tribulation. But there will be a time where God sends this persecution, and it's so that they, as one preacher I like listening to says, God sometimes has to knock you down so you'll look up. And so God's going to knock the nation of Israel down in a really hard way. And so they're going to look up and realize that they have not, they're not going to get it right. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that might actually happen. I'm going to throw some theories at you, some, speculation, educated speculation on that, how that might happen in the course of the next 2 weeks. But starting off tonight, let's start off with the fact that the tribulation is about the nation of Israel. The whole world's going to go through it, but God's major intention is to bring out the seed of believers that are currently there. Beyond that, there are going to be people that are not going to be part of the initial part of the rapture. I almost said the initial rapture. They're not going to be part of the rapture, but are going to come to faith during the tribulation. We will look at that tonight too. They're called tribulation saints. And so God is going to be focused on the entire world, but his eyes are set on the tribulation. How do we know this? How can I be so definitive about this? Because Daniel chapter 9 said so. If you remember, and I think this might tie all the way back to your original question, Daniel 9 at the beginning, and I think it's in chapter 20 or verse 24, says that 70 weeks are decreed for your people, talking to Daniel, so the Jewish people, and your holy city, talking about Jerusalem. So God told Daniel, or the angel Gabriel told Daniel, that these 70 weeks are about your people. And so the 70th week, as we talked about last week, is going to be the tribulation, and that's about Daniel's people. All right, I had a slide here. It's so irritating when I know I have a slide somewhere and I can't find it. I apologize. It was going to be that slide about Daniel again, that we looked at last week, but I guess I might have edited it out for some reason. Anyway, the key part is Daniel tells us the 70 weeks and the 70 whole weeks, and specifically the 70th week, which we're going to start looking at tonight, is about the Jewish people. Now, it's not only about the Jewish people, as we're going to see, but God does have his focus on the Jewish people overall.
I got a question.
Yeah.
Who are God's elite?
God's elite?
Yeah.
What verse are you grabbing that phrase from?
Because
I need to know the context to be able to answer that question.
It talks about how the Antichrist will come, and he will come as
elect, not elite. Elect. Okay.
Yeah.
So, so are you talking about the verse in 2 Thessalonians that talks about it, that even the elect might be deceived?
Right.
Or is that Matthew? I can't remember where. It's either Matthew or 2 Thessalonians. In either case, in that sense, it is the nation of Israel, the elect of the nation of Israel.
It's where he talks about the abomination of desolation.
Right.
Right, but well, no, because I think actually that the context of that verse is that there's gonna be a deception that people will believe the lie, because it is 2 Thessalonians. It might deceive, if possible, even the elect. And in that case, it's the elect would be the nation of Israel, because we don't have to worry about this being deceived by the Antichrist, because we won't be here. And by making that statement, I'm going to spend the month of July proving that that's the case. Maybe not to everybody's satisfaction, but I can't help if you plan to be stubborn about it. All I can do is present what the Bible has to say. Thank you, Daniel, or Dennis, for laughing, as I did mean that as a joke. Okay, let's jump in and get started. Oops. Okay. Hi, come on in. Are you in the right class? Are you here for prophecy? Have a seat, and we are just starting. Okay, so we talked about the tribulation, or Daniel 9:27, which is Daniel 9, the prophecy of the 70 weeks last week, and I thought I had a slide to show you that, but apparently I edited it out. But it's the overview of the tribulation. So we're going to talk about the tribulation tonight. So we're going to start with the stage is being set. So um, it's my contention to you guys that I believe we're pretty close to the point of the tribulation. And having said that, um, I believe my father-in-law, who was the pastor of this church for about, was it 40 years? A day or two. He probably thought the same thing too. So I won't be arrogant enough to believe that, that we are definitively in there. But certainly, as I mentioned earlier with that observation that somebody made about teaching prophecy and about how it used to be, you'd have to hunt a little bit to get news about prophetic things, and now you just pick up the newspaper and you see all kinds of things that the Bible talks about literally there. So, but I do believe the stage is definitely being set, as one of the pastors I like, Andy Woods, often says, the chessboard is being set up, and you can't have the chess match until the chessboard is being set up. So we're looking for signs of the chessboard being set up, and so here's some things I think we can look at. First of all, the rebirth of the nation of Israel in 1948. We talked about week one the fact that people had to spiritualize a lot of Bible prophecy to make up for the fact that the nation of Israel did not exist for 1900 years. And so when it talked about a literal kingdom where Jesus reigned from Jerusalem, well, how is that going to happen? There's no nation of Israel. When it talked about the the nations of the earth being blessed through the nation of Israel, well, how could that happen? There was no nation. That 70 AD took care of that, and there hadn't been one since. Then all of a sudden in 1948, those people who thought Bible prophecy would be fulfilled literally were justified when the nation of Israel was reborn. Hi, Katrina. So that's the first evidence of the stage being set. The second evidence is the desire of Israel for peace. So we see that, and we've been seeing that throughout our adult lives, as it's almost comical about when you look at every major U.S. president in the past 20 years, and they've had their moment where they've had a representative of the Arab community and the prime minister of Israel, next to them, and them shaking hands with some agreement. You can remember. Yes, well, Trump was obviously with his Abrahamic Accords, and you're right. That was probably, and it still might be something, but certainly uh, Clinton did, George Bush did, Reagan did. There was just a whole bunch of these things, and literally, it's because Israel is surrounded. I'm going to jump ahead 2 slides here. Israel is surrounded by the Arab nation. I mean, people talk about how Israel needs to give part of their country back to Palestine. All of those nations in green are Arab nations, and they've got plenty of land. Jordan has plenty of room to take the people of Palestine. Um, there's Israel is surrounded by Arabs. Now, it used to be that all of the Arabs were their enemies. But as we've noticed over the past couple of years, well, I'll leave that up for a little while. As we noticed for the past couple of years, Arab nations have actually become more afraid of Iran than they are of Israel, because although they have an ancestral hatred for the Jewish people that comes from being Arab, it's just part of being Arab that you hate you're brought up hating Jewish people. However, right now they're looking at Iran, at a bunch of crazy people is about to get a nuclear capability, And they're all of a sudden they're thinking, you know what? I may not like the Jewish people, but I'm afraid of these people. So I think it'd be better if we got the people together who were afraid of Iran and, had a little coalition to try to hopefully stand up against them. And so we're seeing that a little bit in the Abrahamic covenants or accords, rather, were a part of that. But Israel, all they really want is peace. And I think if the nation of Israel right now, they would be willing to give up land if it guaranteed them peace. They're just desperate for, and especially with the new, we talked a little bit last week about the new government. I am absolutely convinced that if they were offered peace of any type in exchange for some concessions, they would do so if it was a guaranteed peace, because they just want, they're afraid. They spend a lot of their national budget on defense, and as we've been hearing about, they've had to go on the offensive several times to attack places that threaten their peace, their safety, and so that is very important to them, is to have peace, and that's important for the setup. That is a chess piece on the board, setting up for the tribulation. And the third one is the desire to see the temple rebuilt. We again, the same guy I was talking about earlier, who said he had to search really hard for, used to have to search really hard for prophecy news, also used to say about once or twice a year we would get news about the Temple Mount and stuff that's going on there. It would be a very rare thing. Nowadays, almost on a weekly basis, you can find some news about stuff that's going on there. The entire world, it seems, maybe let me say it a different way, probably the most contested and desired land on the face of this planet is that area right there where the temple used to be built, and where the Arab Dome of the Rock temple now sits. And the Jewish people can't rebuild the temple until that mosque is removed. And if that mosque is removed, there's going to be war. There's going to be war. So um, those are the three things that are being set up right now. I showed you the map of where the nation of Israel right now. And this picture is a picture from a place in Jerusalem called the, darn it, I didn't write the name down. I think it's called the Temple Mount Society, or the Temple Preservation Society, or something. Anyway, it's this place that exists in Jerusalem, and they sometimes allow people in as tourists in, but a lot of times they don't. But these are pictures that they have from inside, and this is a picture from inside um, this society, and this is a actual replica of what they plan to rebuild. Dennis, either last week or the week before, you mentioned the Ark of the Covenant. And I told you guys, I believe that they know where the Ark of the Covenant is, but they haven't revealed it to the world. And because they don't want it revealed until they're ready to put it into the temple. So I believe they are all ready to go. All they literally need is permission. And I think that temple would be put up really quickly. But there is a barrier to keep it coming up, and that is the fact that the place they want to build it already has something on it.
I forget which one that I heard while I was reading. One of the prophets took the Ark of the Covenant and hid it.
Well, there's a lot of theories. I mean, the last time it was known to have been somewhere was during Solomon's time, and there is well, okay, I could get off on a. Hey, come on in. We just got started, so you haven't missed that much. So we're just getting through the introduction here. We're about to start in on looking at the tribulation. And so again, here's this chart I keep throwing up every week, because again, I like how it shows the timeline of things. And so we're just at the point here where the rapture rather is going to hit. So we're going to look at that first, because that comes first, as I've been saying, and then we will jump right into what's going to happen here. We're going to take a different approach maybe than some of you have been exposed to as far as going through the tribulation. We're first going to look at it from an earthly perspective, from maybe a political perspective too. Certainly from maybe like a newspaper perspective, like from how people on earth would be looking at things. And then we're going to probably next week we'll come back and look at the tribulation again, but this time from a heavenly perspective. And that will be and that will touch a lot on, for those of you who know about the book of Revelations, the seal judgments, the trumpets, and the bowl judgments. That will be the kind of perspective we talk about next week. Once again, reminder, Daniel 9:27, which we looked at last week, is basically the Revelation 6 through 19. Those two are equivalent things. So Daniel 9:27 is sort of the outline, and then Revelations 6 through 19 fills in the details. And so that is these things we'll be looking at, so you don't necessarily have to rush to write them down. But those will be all things that these are things that are talked about in 9:27, just brushed briefly, maybe even a couple words, but are expanded on in this. So we're not gonna. I'm sure a lot of you would like us to spend a lot of times in Revelations. We probably won't, with the compromise that I might teach a book study through the book of Revelation, maybe in 6 months, or worst case, maybe a year. And then we'll go in detail into this stuff. There's so much in there, literally, it would take us 3 or 4 months to do it. And I intend for this class, my intention all along was to give you an overview of things, with a special emphasis on the rapture, because I believe that, as Second Thessalonians talks about, that's the great hope of us as believers, is the rapture. So am going to spend the largest amount of time in this class on that subject. But again, let's sort of jump in here. So from the view from Earth, what will things look like from a human perspective? So again, we talked about the table being set, the chessboard being set up. So the next event on the prophetic timeline, we don't know when, wish we did, the rapture first. And so again, I'm going to spend the month of July establishing this fact, that going through the scriptural evidence that I believe demonstrates this. But I believe that we will be watching all these events from heaven. We'll watch the action from heaven. Okay, I see where I was going with that. This is going to be something that we get to watch and not participate in, and that's a good thing, as we're going to find out. So some scriptural support here. Now, brethren, concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. So our gathering together to him is the rapture, whether you believe in a pre-trib or a post-trib rapture, or a mid-trib or a partial rapture, or whatever you believe. That's being gathered to him is the rapture. So regarding this, let no one deceive you by any means, for that day, the day of the Lord. Oh, thank you, Dennis. Keep me honest. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed. So that day being the day of the Lord, which is, as we looked at a couple weeks ago, is sort of a Old Testament euphemism for the tribulation. That day will not come unless the falling away comes first. So I have that underlined. So take that and put it in your back pocket. In about 3 weeks, we're going to take that back out again. We're coming back to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and we're going to do a study of this chapter specifically. And we're going to break down these verses, because I think there's a lot of really good truths in here that I want you guys to understand. And I'm going to dedicate a whole week to breaking this chapter apart, because I love this chapter. But the important part for the point I'm trying to make is the falling away comes first, and then the man of sin is revealed. So Antichrist comes after the gathering together to him. You'll have to take me. So preview. The falling away comes first. I'm going to demonstrate to you how I believe that's the rapture. So, um, and then the man of sin is revealed. So that's the Antichrist. So the Antichrist isn't even going to be revealed until we're raptured away. So anyway, we're going to be watching it from heaven. Now, something interesting, something I didn't know very well and have heard it talked about a lot lately is a gap between the rapture and tribulation. So we know we're going to be taken away, yet the book of Daniel clearly talks about the fact that um, the tribulation is going to start with a signing of a peace treaty. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, or maybe last week, a peace treaty between the Antichrist and the Jewish nation. And we just talked about the great desire of the nation of Israel to find peace. Right. That's it. Well, so the beginning of the tribulation period, the beginning of Daniel's 70th week, starts with that peace treaty. Um, and so there's gonna need to be time between when we're taken up out of the way and he's in a position to actually um, sign that peace treaty, because it's not literally going to be at the same moment.
And it's enough time to rebuild the temple.
Not necessarily. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit. But so imagine for a minute what Earth is going to be like if what I say is true, and we're going to be, all of a sudden we're literally going to be snatched away from the Earth, and um, I don't know, a billion people, 100 million people. I don't know how many people will be a part of that, but imagine a whole mess of people will be taken off of the Earth. Certainly, if you've read the Left Behind series or seen some of the movies, they attempt to portray it. I found a random picture off the internet and sort of using it as my illustration. It's going to be pretty chaotic. Imagine somebody driving along a freeway at 60 miles an hour, and then suddenly they're taken up to heaven. Well, that car isn't going to be taken with them. So that car is going to be likely out of control and likely hitting other cars. Um, Potentially, there's airplane pilots all of a sudden raptured away. Now we've got nice autopilot stuff, but potentially nobody's there to push the button. Hopefully they've got things in place, but potentially airplanes are crashing. Potentially infrastructure is impacted, and it's going to take some time. My whole point is just to say this: it's going to take some time for the world to sort of process what has just happened. Um, there, there's going to be people in critical roles that are all of a sudden gone. There's going to be loved ones of people that are going to be gone, and they're going to be freaked out. When people disappear, when a couple people disappear, it's like, well, I wonder what happened. When, a big, huge group of people disappear, there's going to be a lot of speculation about what happened. Well, so it brings back that verse that we were talking about earlier about there's going to be a deception, that there's going to be a lie, that even the elect of God could be fooled if it was possible. In other words, the verse is saying it's not actually possible that God will keep their minds clear, but he's going to allow some people to be deluded into believing the lie. Now, we don't know what that lie is. I think as we get closer to the event, we can sort of guess what the lie is. I know a lot of people I've had one person who's been asking me rather frequently, what's going to happen, or what about these aliens? What is all this talk about aliens and what's going to happen? And I don't really know where that's going, but I can speculate that perhaps that is one possible potential story that could be told about if a group of people disappeared. Certainly, one possible explanation is, well, we've come to tell you that we know that there are aliens that have been visiting our planet, and we don't know this for certain, but we suspect that they might have had a hand in taking away these people for some reason.
They've abducted the third of the planet.
Well, I wish it was a third. I'm becoming skeptical that it was is that many, but I certainly it will be a great number of people are going to be gone, and that could be a possible explanation. Certainly, the aliens. It's over the years, people have speculated different things on what potential excuse could be used for a bunch of people suddenly disappearing. And I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about it, but I think we can just not even not even spending a lot of brain cells. I think we could come up with several potential reasons that they might use to explain the disappearance. I think some people actually might, who maybe are associated with Christian circles but not, or have actually come to a saving faith in Jesus Christ, might say, hey, I remember hearing at church or hearing a Christian talking about the rapture, and I wonder if that's it. All these people are gone, and it seems like a lot of them, were people who were known to go to church often or talk about God often or something like that. Um, But then I think what's going to happen is the Pope's going to come out and say, well, I'm still here. If there would have been a rapture, I would have been taken. And I'm sorry if that sort of gives you an insight into how I believe that the current Pope, I do not believe is a follower of Jesus Christ. And if you want to have a conversation about that, I'm willing to have that with you outside of this class. Just by his actions, I don't believe that he is Christian. But I believe that there's going to be, so I'm going to be an equal opportunity offender. I believe that there are going to be some Protestant pastors that are going to be left behind. I think there are going to be some pastors that we will be surprised that are not going to be taken, that are going to be left behind. And I think those people are going to be pointed out at and said, those Christians are left. So obviously all the Christians weren't taken, so it must have been something else. And so then they're going to go to the alien, to the other theories that might explain our disappearance. But my point simply is this: there's going to be a major disruption in this world. And I believe that that major disruption, similar to sort of what we went through last March, where everybody's life was just sort of turned upside down with the pandemic and the lockdowns and stuff. I believe that it's going to be a similar state of confusion when this happens, and I believe that that's going to provide an opportunity for new leaders or leaders that we know about to come in and gain a lot of influence. And so I believe that the rise of the Antichrist will be facilitated by the rapture of the church, that it will provide an opportunity in the chaos. Strong leadership will be looked for and embraced. And once uh, that person comes forward, I think people are going to flock to him, and political ideologies are going to be set aside because people are going to be afraid. And when people are afraid, they are willing to give up freedom.
Globalism.
We're going there. Um,
I have a quick question. I just want
yeah,
pets go with us at the same time if we have a dog in our family.
I will tell you this. Probably, I don't want to say at least once a week, but at least a couple times a month. I pray that. Please, please don't leave my cats down here to die. And oftentimes I will be honest. Sometimes when I'm putting food in their dish, I put a little extra, thinking, well, maybe this will just be a little bit more than they need. I hope so. The Bible doesn't say, but the Bible does talk about in the millennial kingdom animals being present. So I also believe that personally, and this is selfishly, I believe that God established this love relationship. You can't love a turtle. I know some people have a turtle as a pet, but the turtle doesn't show any affection. I believe that domestic animals have that affection, that type of love for their owner, and I believe that that love is of God. And so I would like to believe that they will be raptured with us, just like the children will. We haven't talked about the rapture much yet, but I do believe that children under the age of being able to make a decision for Christ will be raptured as well, because God is a just God. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the rapture. I hope the pets are raptured, and I pray for it, but I don't know. I can't give you a definitive answer. I wish I could. Yes.
It's not like that, but the whole thing is like, when we're with the Lord, we're not, those things are gonna be so,
Yeah.
we won't even.
Our perspectives will definitely change. Yes.
So the idea to me is right now, while you have them, cherish them and thank God for what He's
Yeah.
given us, because we don't.
We definitely don't know, and certainly there's every indication that they won't be, and that there'll be food for our neighbors. But I
Even a turtle had
I turtle soup is I've heard is pretty good, but I can't say anything definitive. The Bible certainly doesn't say, and all I can say is my hope is in that direction. So here was that magical slide I was looking for earlier. This is just again that overview of 927, that because we're going to start talking about the tribulation now. So this is that slide that talks about the peace treaty, the covenant at the beginning of 927. Then we at the about the temple being desecrated, and then at the end of the tribulation is the second coming of Jesus. And at that point, this is the 70th week of Daniel, which is also the tribulation. And this is after Jesus comes back, everything is good from that point on. If you're a believer in Him, if you by faith have accepted the gift of salvation that He's given you, it's something you can't earn, something that you can't achieve by doing good works, but only comes by faith in His sacrifice. Then I believe that everything um, from the rapture onward is good, and second, definitely everything from the second coming is good. Okay, so let's start it. So we've got the rapture. Talked about that. We talked about this, and maybe not enough. I believe there's a gap that's going to take place between the rapture and the start of the tribulation, where the chaos of the world is going to allow for a lot of political compromises that wouldn't be feasible right now. Like there would be too much resistance to it, of giving away power to one individual or to one um, system, and so I think this gap is where that's going to sort of take place. I've heard people speculate it could be as short as a week, and I've heard people speculate it could be as long as 7 years. And some people think that if you remember the Joseph, okay, is that what we're talking about? No, I'm going to say that this is why I take an hour and a half every week, is I go follow every rabbit trail that I go into. There are some people believe that there's going to be a 7 years of plenty, and then 7 years of famine, and so they believe there's going to be 7 years between the rapture and the tribulation where things will be good, and then they get really bad. I don't necessarily follow that philosophy, but I do believe there is going to be some amount of gap. I think probably a month or two where things are sort of shaken up and sort of coalesce towards where they're going. And where they're going is this. So we know that it starts with the peace treaty. We looked at this verse in detail the last couple of weeks, or at least last week. He will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week. We talked about who he is, and we looked back on the only two possibilities and talked through the possibilities. And then I showed you some New Testament verses that support the fact that this is the Antichrist. We just looked at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3, that talks about the man of sin will be revealed. Well, that's that. Is that what I wanted to say? Sorry, strike that. I wanted to say something else, and I thought that. But anyway, we talked about last week how this is, and you can go back and review the recording from last week, that this is the Antichrist setting up a peace treaty. The many in Daniel, it's shown that the many is the Jewish people. In the 1 week, we talked about the 1 week being, is that a hand? Okay, just want to make sure. That the 1 week is talking about the 70th week, and we showed how 1 week in this prophecy is actually 7 years. And so with that was 2 weeks ago, we looked at how that firms out. So all that to say that we're going to start with peace treaty with the Antichrist and the Jewish nation. I believe that this peace treaty will set the table for the temple to be rebuilt. So Dennis, you were talking about that earlier. I believe that part of that will be in disagreement. However, there's another possibility on how that could come about that we're going to look at in a minute. But I do believe that Israel's desire for peace will lead them into an agreement with somebody who looks like he's a friend of the Jewish nation and is going to turn out to not be such a great friend, as we're going to look at here. The second thing is something called the Ezekiel 38 war. I really wanted to go into a lot of detail on this, but I realized I could probably spend an entire class just talking about this. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview, and sometime, I don't know when, maybe I'll be able to come back to this. But the Bible in Ezekiel chapter 38, and also sort of carries over a little bit in Ezekiel chapter 39, talks about, is a prophecy about nations coming against Israel and a gathered nation. Yes, that's true. It's not the same. So it talks about these nations who are going to come against Israel, and it specifies which nations are going to be. And if you look at the people involved, those people never were in alliance against the Jewish people in all of history. And so it's still a future thing to happen, is there's this war. And we're going to look at it real briefly here. I will say this in fairness. Some people believe that this actually could happen before the tribulation. Some people believe it could happen in the gap between the rapture and the tribulation. And some people actually believe that this could happen before the rapture. And so I'm putting it here in this time period, and I'll show you why next week when we come back and look at the seal judgments that are talked about in Revelations. It talks about war, and I believe that war is this war. But there are good teachers that believe that this will happen before the rapture and between the rapture and the tribulation. Yes?
If it's before, maybe it's before the peace treaty.
It could be, yes. And definitely, I've heard people that want to put it between the rapture and the church. That's specifically why, is they believe that the results of this war will be the Antichrist coming and setting up a peace treaty saying, never again will we allow the nation of Israel to be attacked like this. And so this peace treaty will guarantee the peace of Jerusalem. And I actually like that philosophy. And so I'm not actually married to having this be inside the tribulation. It actually could happen before it. But I put it here because I wanted to talk about it. So whether it's right before the tribulation or at the tribulation, I believe it will be close to that time period.
You know, what's really scary is that watching everything that's going on in our country today, we could be one of those nations that are aligned against Israel.
Could be. And certainly if you think about the fact that what our country would be like if the Christian influence was taken out of the way, and if the Holy Spirit was taken out of, because when we're raptured, the Holy Spirit, I mean, we're the vessels of the Holy Spirit on earth. And so, I mean, it's not like the Holy Spirit won't have the capability of being on earth, as we're going to see. But, you know, when we're gone, our influence and the Holy Spirit's influence through us on this world will be gone as well. And you could easily see how our country could, especially with a lot of people in government power right now who are not friends of Israel, you could see how that could easily be swayed. Now we're going to actually look at some of the cities involved, or the nations involved in this, and you could speculate that some of them might be a European confederacy that might include America. So let's look at this real quick. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, turn your face towards Gog. Thank you. Son of man, turn your face towards Gog of the land of Magog. Okay, so first of all, let me say, this is going to be really dense, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on it. So you're probably going to end up being sort of frustrated a little bit. My sole purpose doing this is just to make you guys aware that there is a future war prophesied about that hasn't happened yet, and that I believe is going to happen somewhere near the start of the tribulation, either before or after. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it. Like I said, I think I could do the whole class just on this war, but I just want to expose you to it. So, son of man, turn your face towards Gog. That's a leader of the land of Magog. So there's a land of Magog, and Gog would be considered the leader of Magog. Um, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal prophesy against him and say, "This is what the Lord God says: I am against you, Gog, chief princes of Meshech and Tubal." I'm going to choke on a lot of these words, so. "I will turn you around and put hooks in your jaws and bring you out with all your armies, including horse and riders, who are all splendidly dressed, a huge company armed with shields and bucklers, all of them brandishing swords. Persia, Cush, and Put are with them, all of them with shields and helmets. Gomer with all its troops, and Beth Togarmah with the remotest parts of the north, along with all the troops. Many people are with you. Be prepared and get yourself ready, you and all your company who have been mobilized around you. You will be their guard. After a long time, you will be summoned. In the last years, so again, this prophecy isn't something that happened in the past, like some people say, because it specifically says, in the last years, you will enter a land that has been restored from war and regathered from many peoples to the mountains of Israel. Does that sound something like what may have happened in 1948 when the nation of Israel was restored from war and regathered from many peoples? The Jewish people came from many different places, and it's still happening to this day. People are still migrating from other countries. Jewish people are migrating to the nation of Israel, which has long been in ruin. Okay, so again, chapter verse 8 is pretty clear what's happening here. They will be brought out from the peoples, and all of them now live securely. This phrase is one of the reasons why I believe that this will happen after the peace treaty, because it talks about the Jewish people living securely. And I think we've just from the last month or so, we know that that's not really the case right now. The Jewish people are not living securely in their nation right now. They're constantly under attack, terrorists and other things. However, I don't want to get too bogged down on the details. So this is talking about a conglomeration of nations coming together against Israel. And we're not going to go into the whole chapter, but it talks about how God is going to miraculously intervene to show, and he's going to, this big conglomeration of people are going to be foiled. And obviously, if you look at the nations involved here, you've got Persia, which up until 1920 or 1930 was actually still the name of Iran. They just, within the last 100 years, they changed their name to Iran, but it used to be called Persia for the longest time. We see the area of Magog, up there is there. When it talks about Russia, and again, this is not from. It's easy for us to say, "Oh, Rosh, that must be Russia." This actually comes from Josephus, who lived at the time of Christ. He was a Jewish historian, and he did commentary on the Bible, the Old Testament, not the Bible, the Old Testament, and he was talking about this prophecy, and he said, "I know where these people are. I from the records, the historical records, I can tell you where these people migrated from the time of Ezekiel to my time, which was about 350, 400 years." He goes, so he identified Rosh as being in not Russia. He didn't say they're Russia, but he identified them as being in the northern part of Israel, and he identified Meshach, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah as tribes that migrated to, well, what we know as Turkey. It was Greece at that time. Uh, Come on, Mesopotamia. Thank you. So, he identified what. So Put is Libya, Cush is Sudan, Egypt, or not Egypt, Africa. He identified all of these tribes, and he said where that they were at that time. Well, we can look at it with our modern eye and see how these nations line up. The interesting thing is, and why I think another reason why I think we're really close to this war occurring, is because in history, Turkey, Russia, and Iran have never really been allies at anything. Sometimes they've actually been at war with each other. And just within the last year or two, these leaders of these countries have come together. And if you If I had the time, I could show you newspaper articles where they actually have a picture of the three leaders of these three countries together. And so it's very interesting how political alliances are coming together to make this type of thing a lot more realistic. If you remember the slide I had up there a little bit ago, where it showed all of the Arab nations as opposed to Israel, a lot of Put and Kush and Persia and Turkey, all those are Arab nations. It's Russia is the only non-Islamic nation talked about here. And an interesting thing, the religion that is growing the fastest in Russia right now is Islam. So I'm not saying that that's any relationship, but it's very interesting how the politics of today are coming together to make this war a lot more realistic. Um, Now, again, if this is something you're really interested in, I know there's at least one good book, and I'll put it up on our prophecy website that you can go and read about this. As a matter of fact, it might already be up there. There's a book called Middle East Meltdown by my favorite pastor, well, my second favorite pastor, Kurt being, well, actually, I shouldn't even say that. Matt's one of my favorite pastors, Andy Woods. He wrote this book called Middle East Meltdown, where he talks about Ezekiel 38 war. If you go to the prophecy web link I've emailed out, um, it'll be one of the books listed there in the recommendation. Very interesting subject, something I would love to talk about a little bit more, but I promised I'd try to be done about 7:30, and I'm not going to make it.
With God up there, is China to the right? I'm wondering, does China become incorporated into?
I don't think this. So let's be clear. This is strictly regarding the Ezekiel 38 war. This does not.
Armageddon?
Yes, I don't think this is Armageddon. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced it's not Armageddon based on who's involved. And I think one of the things well, okay, we're going to get there. I'm going to answer that indirectly actually right now. Because the next thing that's going to happen in the first 3.5 years is world politics is going to continue along its current trajectory. What's the current trajectory? Where was a lot of world leaders just last week? The G9 or G7. But interestingly, at the G7, 10 world leaders were invited and 7 came. I thought that was very interesting from a prophetic sense. But my point being, globalism, certainly, let's come together, World Health Organization, banding together for vaccines. These aren't necessarily bad things, but the problem is these are things that, when done by men, imperfect men, do not historically go well. When people try to take power for the people, like the People's Republic of China and the USSR, it's supposed to be communist, means people, it's the people's government. Well, they never go well. But there is a big push right now. Let's all come together. Let's have the Paris Climate Accords. Let's all come together and have standards on how we're going to save the world from the climate disaster, those kind of things. That's where the politics is going right now. You just pick up today's newspaper and see that. That's going to continue along, and it's going to be magnified magnified by the rapture, as people are gone, and people are, what do we need? I just went out to lunch with my ex-manager yesterday, and we went to Chili's, and it took us about an hour and a half, and we actually went before lunch hour. It still took us an hour and a half to get in and out of there. And the reason why is because there's not enough people working. We know about how, people are choosing to take the handout rather than work.
Going back to work, the handout's going away.
So, but my point bringing that up is, so that's how our society is being hindered, just by some people not working. Imagine a great workforce suddenly disappearing, and now all of a sudden the production of food, having electricity running, all the infrastructure that requires, transportation and electricity and water purification, all, people that used to do those jobs are gone and there's a work shortage of people, there's going to be a great desire of people. Let's come together and solve these problems globally, together as a global community. And the Antichrist is going to step right in. He's going to be very charismatic. He's going to have all the right answers, and people are going to flock to him. And it's hard for us as a country to believe that at one point there was actually a president that both parties nominated for president. And of course, it was George Washington. It hasn't happened since. But if you can imagine political parties putting aside their differences and coming together under the leadership of one person, that's what's going to happen during this time. And the results of this will be one world government. Now, what that one world government will look like, I've heard 100 different people explain it 100 different ways. Some people are really strong on the fact that it's going to come out of the European Union, and that's going to be the beginning of it. And it's just going to grow until the entire nations are assumed into it. I personally believe that one of the things that's going to happen as a part of the Ezekiel 38 war is a lot of nations are going to be stripped of their political and military might, and they're going to have to go along where, the Arab world isn't necessarily known with going along with the desires of, the Western nations as far as, climate and all this other stuff. They're gonna be needing help after they're conquered, or not conquered, defeated by God during the Ezekiel 38 war. I believe Russia is not going to be a global power because of that war. And I believe that the beginning of the world government will be every other nation on this earth putting pressure on the nation of China to conform or be ostracized from the global community. And I believe that they will be brought into submission because of that. I also believe that government will be overthrown and they will be assumed into the one world government. I believe that the Antichrist will lead that into happening. And the reason why is because the Bible clearly teaches that during this time period, the Antichrist is going to be the ruler of the entire world. And that's something we have never seen before. Even when, the Roman government, or the Roman Empire rather, it was claimed that they ruled over the entire world, the entire known world in reality. But in reality, the nation of China, the nation of India was never under their authority. Obviously, they didn't know it at the time, but North America and South America definitely didn't know or care about the Roman Empire. So we've never really seen a global government before, but the Bible talks about that. Here's a couple verses that talk about that. Daniel chapter 7. This is what he says: the fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on earth, different from the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, and crush it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will rise from this kingdom. Another, different from the previous ones, will rise after them and subdue the 3 kings. So this is talking about potential political things. I've heard different theories about what these 10 kings are and 10 horns, and some people believe that there will be 10 global leaders initially, one over 10 regions, and that they'll like rule the earth. They'll be the government will be like that, where the 10 people are sort of like a committee who run the earth. And then the Antichrist rises up and subdues 3 of them, and then the other 7 just give over their power to him. So he sort of ends up as the guy over the whole thing. That's probably the most plausible theory I've heard about that. But it talks about this global empire having 10 leaders, and then 3 of them are thrown down. And then it jumps right into talking about this guy who, another, different from the previous one. So this another is going to be in context here. He will speak words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will intend to change religious festivals and laws. The Holy One and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. So we looked a little bit at this last week. This is the second half of the tribulation, where the Jewish people are put into a intense set of persecution. We'll come back to that obviously later.
So, back 3.5 years of tribulation.
That's going to be, I believe, so I said this last week and I'll say it again. I believe that the first half of the tribulation is going to be pretty bad for most of the world, but will be pretty good for the nation of Israel. And then I believe that once the event that happens in the middle of the tribulation takes place, then that flip-flop, well, it doesn't flip-flop. Then it becomes really, really bad for the Jewish people and only sort of bad for, well, and pretty bad for the rest of the world as well. Although at that point, most of the people will have submitted to the Antichrist rule. Again, we'll get there. Although not tonight, obviously, based on our time here. Okay, so the next thing is the Jewish temple will, I want to get through at least this first 3.5 years, and then we'll probably leave off here tonight. So the Jewish temple will be rebuilt. So again, Dennis alluded to this earlier. I believe that the Dome of the Rock mosque that currently exists where the Jewish temple needs to be rebuilt and where, as I said earlier, might be the most contentious piece of land on this planet, is going to be destroyed. I have a suspicion it's going to happen during the Ezekiel 38 war, that some errant rocket is going to be shot in there and it's going to be destroyed. And that's how it won't lead to a war, is it's going to be, well, you guys, you shot your own mosque down, so you can't blame us for it. So, and then I believe that the Antichrist will step in, make this peace treaty, and part of the peace treaty is going to be you can rebuild the temple. That right now, if you look at how Jerusalem is organized government-wise, Israel controls the city, but the nation of Jordan polices the Temple Mount. So it's a really, if you could imagine the state of California, where the governor ruled the state of California, except for,
Washington police.
that there was this area where a different state, they ruled over that piece of land. State of okay, yeah, yeah. Some people would actually like that, I think. Um, so anyway, so that's the current state of Israel right now, or Jerusalem rather, is that Jordan controls that. I believe that Jordan could either by peace treaty through the Abrahamic Accords or through this Ezekiel 38 war will concede that Temple Mount back to Israel and that they'll finally be able to build their temple. And I believe that it will not, I mean, people talk, well, that's going to take a year or two for that temple to be rebuilt. I think you'll see the fastest building project ever done on the face of this planet. Some people speculate it could be done in 7 days. I don't believe that, but I know that there are some motivated people with a lot of money and with the plans. They're not going to start by drawing up plans. They have the plans already drawn up. They have some of the resources already allocated, and they're ready to go. Dennis.
Nehemiah took 30 days,
Was it 30 days?
30 or 60.
I don't think it was that quick. I don't think 60 days to rebuild the temple. So first of all, you said Nehemiah. Nehemiah didn't rebuild the temple. It was Ezra who did.
No, but he built the walls around the
Oh, they built the walls around Jerusalem. My point simply is the Jewish people have been waiting for a lot of the Jewish people aren't necessarily even religious, but this is a spot of national pride to them. This is going to be this is going to be like Mount Rushmore to them or something, or I'm trying to think of some national monument that even non-religious people are going to want to see this happen. It's going to be a source of national pride to them that this temple is rebuilt.
Vatican to the Pope.
There you go.
Have you read the theories that the temple, the mountain of the dome is actually not where
Yes.
the temple is?
Yeah.
It's
This
possible
city of David. I've heard those. I don't necessarily believe them, but yes, there are some people that believe that the Dome of the Rock could stay in its place and the temple could be built somewhere else. It's possible. I definitely realize tonight that we're doing a lot of speculation, and I'm throwing in verses to support some of this stuff, but there's stuff that the Bible clearly defines, and there's things that we could just guess, and our guesses will become more and more educated as we get closer and closer to the event.
I think so, covering are being destroyed by,
Yes, which is why I don't believe the Ark of the Covenant is going to be revealed, even though it's known where it is, because if it was revealed, it would be targeted at least. And so I think that it's being hid. So why do I believe that the Jewish temple will be rebuilt? Well, we looked at this last week. In the middle of the week, the Antichrist is going to come in and he's going to interrupt the Jewish practice of sacrifices and offerings in the temple. And it's Jesus and Daniel and Jesus both referred to it as the abomination of desolation. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. We're not quite there yet, but clearly because it's predicted that it's going to happen, the temple has to be there for it to happen in. So clearly in the first half of the tribulation, the Jewish temple is going to be rebuilt. Okay, we're coming up to the end here. Hang with me for 5 more minutes. So not the last thing. I think there's a couple more things. One of the things I would be most excited to see is there's talk about they're called the two witnesses that are going to appear in Jerusalem and are going to be prophets for God. And they're going to spend their time preaching the gospel and preaching against the world leadership that the nation of Jerusalem is going to be excited about. And so they're going to be considered a thorn in the side of Israel, and they're not going to be well liked, but they're going to be respected because they have great power. And just imagine it being similar to the days of Elijah, where Elijah came and said, "Hey, there's not going to be rain for a long period of time," and he wasn't a popular guy because of that. And so, so the verses that talk about this are in Revelation chapter 11, starting at verse 3. I will empower my two witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days, which is 42 months. Sorry, which is 42 months, which is 3.5 years. And a half a time, right? Very good. Excuse me. Dressed in sackcloth. These are the two trees and the two lampstands that stand before the Lord of the earth. If anybody wants to harm them, fire comes from their mouths and consumes their enemies. If anybody wants to harm them, he must be killed in this way. These men have the power to close up the sky so that it does not rain during the days of their prophecy. They also have the power over the waters to turn them into blood and to strike the earth with every plague whenever they want. Okay, so that talks about these people that are going to be around for 3.5 years, and they're going to be witnesses for God in Jerusalem. So real briefly, a lot of speculation on who these people are. The common belief is that they're the prophet Elijah and Moses. And the reason why is because the verse 5 and 6 talks about, oops, what did I do? I went way off course. Okay, hold on a second. Give me a second. I gotta get. There we go. Thank you. Okay, be careful here. So verse 5 talks about fire comes from their mouth and consumes their enemies. This is a reference back to Elijah, which called down fire from heaven to destroy his enemies when he was being persecuted. Verse 6 talks about one of them having the power over water to turn it into blood and to strike the earth with every plague. A call back to Moses, what he did against Egypt. Now,
Is that also referring to one of the seals?
Potentially. I don't necessarily think so, but potentially it could. There's also a belief that that it's Elijah and the Enoch, and the reason for that is in the Old Testament there's two people that were taken to heaven without dying, which is sort of a precursor to our rapture. One of those is Elijah. If you know the story, he was God took him up in a fiery chariot or a chariot of fire or whatever. And the other was Enoch, who walked with God and was not, because God took him. So because there were two people that never died, and because, spoiler alert, these people are killed by the Antichrist sometime in the latter part of the tribulation, that it's believed that because those two people never died, that those are going to be two that are brought back to earth, and then they will actually die at that point. And so, um, to fulfill the cycle of death for all of mankind. So there's two different beliefs. I don't think it really matters what you believe. The important thing to know is that there's going to be two people of God that are going to be sort of a thorn in the side of Israel at this point in time.
Do you think a lot of people will turn to God when they hear these witnesses? Or
I believe I so I'm going to breeze over this next one. Let me answer that in a second. I'm going to go over this real quick. The world will be united behind one religion. Um, I believe that we talked a little bit about earlier about how I believe the Pope's still going to be here. I believe that there will be a Christian, Protestant Christian presence of people who did not take the Bible seriously and made it about themselves and about power and riches and so forth. That will be left behind. I believe Islam, obviously, I believe will be left behind. I believe all these things will be brought together under one religion. Book of I don't know why I had the blank slide there. The book of Revelations in chapter 17 talks about this briefly. I'm not going to go over these verses. Um, in Revelation, it talks about, it gives inference to the fact that there's going to be a religious system that the 10 kings are going to ascribe to. Uh, I'm really running out of time. I want to cover this very last point. And I promise you this is our last point for tonight. 144 Jewish evangelists will blanket the world for Christ. So, Shell, now I'll go back to the question you just asked. I believe that these two witnesses will be the leaders of these 144,000 people. I believe that these people are going to be set aside for God, and as soon as the rapture hits, God is going to impress upon these pre-chosen people 1,200 from each 12,000 from each tribe of Israel. And I'll show this in a second in Revelations. And they're going to become witnesses. And that multitude of people I said at the beginning of the class today are going to be saved within the tribulation period. That's going to be through their influence. I also believe that these people will be key to the remnant, 1/3 of Israel that Zechariah talks about as being saved and brought back to the Messiah. I believe that these people will be the way that when they're going to ignore these people for the first 3.5 years, and suddenly when the Antichrist desecrates their temple, they're going to realize God's going to open some people of their hearts, and they're going to realize that what these witnesses, these 144,000 evangelists are talking about is true, and that's when a lot of them are going to turn their faith back to Jesus and realize that Jesus was the Messiah they've been looking for all along. Um, yes, well, we'll talk about that next week when we look at the trumpet judgments. So real quick, Revelation here, where it talks about these 144,000 witnesses. So he's talking to the angels were about to some angels were about to bring a judgment on the world, and then another angel comes along and says, "Wait, don't harm the land or the sea or the trees until we have placed the seal of God on the foreheads of his servants." And I heard how many were marked with the seal of God. 144,000 were sealed from all the tribes of Israel. From Judah, 12,000; from Reuben, 12,000; Gad, 12,000; Asher, 12,000; Naphtali, 12,000; Manasseh, 12,000; Simeon, 12,000; Levi, 12,000; Issachar, 12,000; Zebulun, 12,000; from Joseph, 12,000; and Benjamin, 12,000. Why did I take the time to read all of that? A lot of people want to spiritualize these 144,000, say that it's not literal 144,000 people. It's a great big group of people, and it's not necessarily going to be Jewish people. It's going to be a church presence. That the church is still going to be on here on earth, and they're going to be the people leading people to Christ. But he specifically goes through and lists the 12 tribes and 12,000 from each. God wouldn't do that if he was talking figuratively. So this is a literal gathering of, imagine the Apostle Paul and multiplying him by 144,000 people. And that's what this world is going to go through. They're going to have 144,000 Apostle Pauls running around evangelizing the world. And And it's going to be an incredible time of, people talk about this great revival that's coming up where people are going to be turning back to God. I believe that. I just don't believe we're going to be here to see it. I believe that these people are going to bring such a zeal for God and for selling out for their faith that it's just going to win a multitude of people over who are looking for some hope in this world that is going to be turned upside down. And we're going to look at how, from a world perspective, what things look like next week. But it's going to be chaos, and people are going to be looking for hope. And that's when Jesus comes to figuratively to reveal himself to them. Yes.
You're referring to Joel 2 as part of the prophecy of Joel.
Remind me, Joel 2.
I think it's Joel. I could be. It's in Joel.
Okay. Remind me of the passage of Joel. I'm not clicking.
I don't know if you're
You don't have to quote it. Just give me.
like, about prophesying in dreams.
I don't know what that means. I've heard people.
I look at that as a dual prophecy.
It could be. I've never associated that specifically with the 144,000 people. I've heard that applied to both Christians and Jewish people.
Yeah.
So I can't answer that question. I don't have a good feel for that.
144,000 are the ones that are going to go back to New Jerusalem.
Yes, and more too. So I think we'll talk about that next week. So okay.
How come Manasseh in there when he's not one of the
So your bigger question should be, why isn't Dan in that list? He should be, because they list Joseph and Manasseh was Joseph's son. So really, right, and so was Ephraim. So actually, Joseph and his two sons are represented in there. So the tribe of Dan is missing. There's a lot of speculation on why that is. All I could do is repeat that speculation. I don't have a good feel for it. If you look at the history of the tribe of Dan, they weren't a tribe that was overly dedicated to God, and they were usually the tribe that was first led into apostasy and to worship Baal and other false gods. And so it's believed that tribe has sort of been pruned away, so to speak. But that's speculation and not anything biblical. Please do not take that as in any way an authoritative answer on that.
I want you to think absorbed into.
That's also possible. I've probably heard a half a dozen theories on why Dan isn't listed. I don't know the real answer to that. Sure.
And God said, "Give it down to countries." People of Dan said, let's get out of it.
So this is where we're going to leave off tonight. So we'll leave off here, and when we come back next week, we will pick up. Okay, I jumped back a little bit there. So we're going to pick back up, and we will start talking about the midpoint. And there's the spoiler alert: the Antichrist is killed. What? He's killed? How did that happen? Okay, so that's what we're going to pick up next week. After probably a 5 or 10 minute recapitulation of what I just said tonight. You know how I am. I love to repeat myself. We have a couple minutes for questions if I've really just knocked somebody for a loop and you just don't know up from down anymore, or you just have a question.
You skipped over the Queen of Babylon.
I didn't. I probably will talk about it a little bit next week. Oh, I did. Yes, I skipped over the verses in Revelation chapter 17 that talks about Babylon a little bit. I probably will pick that back up next week.
Was that probably the united behind one religion?
Yes. Boy, I could do a whole message just on that. Because I've heard somebody else do a message on it, and I thought it was a great message.
Of God's couple wrath.
So all of this to say, it is not going to be fun, and I'll bring you back to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 that says, when it talks about the rapture, that God's going to come down with Jesus is going to come down from. I'm not going to even try to quote it, but Jesus is going to come with the shout, the voice of the archangels, the trumpet, the call of God. dead in Christ will rise first. Then those who are alive and remain will be caught up together with him in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air, the rapture. Wherefore, comfort each other with those words. The comfort is, I don't believe we're going to be here for it. And that's one of the reasons why, is because if we were going to be here for it, I would believe that Paul, instead of comforting one another with these words, he would be saying, so prepare yourselves for the upcoming problems. He would tell us to, hey, get ready, be prepared mentally, stop whining about these little trials you have every day. You're going to know what trials are once, the Antichrist come and those things. So it's a comfort, I believe, those words, because we're not going to be here for this stuff.
Jesus turned around and says, head for the hills and don't look back.
So we're going to talk about that. So that's next week. So anyway, so we'll pick back up on this again next week. Hey, thank you guys for your patience. Dennis, I'm going to ask you if you'll close in prayer for us.